We have been talking about, obviously, there was a big story last week, and we saw the number. It was a daily countdown, the number of people who were turning themselves in. I believe there were 18 at this point who were turning themselves in. People who were involved in this effort to, at least the allegation to overthrow or the election. Well, Donald Trump got his mugshot, Mark Meadows, and a number of people. And what's been happening is, and this is something as I was watching this, and this is why I have the perfect person on to talk about it, because as we were watching this and this notion that, well, Donald Trump, he's going, down to Rice Street. I think that's what they call the jail there. Yeah, they actually call it Rice Street. They were mocking the idea that Donald Trump would be in this jail that have known to have these horrid conditions. I wanted to have a conversation about those horrid conditions. So this is a less political discussion, but to talk about the jail. It's funny, it's kind of cute to mock the conditions at the jail, but the conditions at the jail are what they are. So joining us to have a conversation about this is Ameshia Cross. Ameshia Cross is a writer, Democratic strategist, media contributor, former policy advisor for the National Urban League, and campaign communications advisor for President Barack Obama. Ameshia, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. So excited to be here.
I wanted to have a conversation with you about your article. So I wanted to read something from the article. This is just the beginning of the article that you wrote for the Daily Beast. And you were talking about, it's not surprising that Trump has a commanding lead over other voters, but it said, what is interesting and new is that Trump's indictment in Fulton County, Georgia, has led to long overdue coverage of the horrid state of the Fulton County Jail. Rice Street, as the Fulton County Jail is known locally, is a lockup notorious for its squalid, sometimes deadly conditions. Last September, LaShawn Thompson, a 35-year-old suffering from mental illness and jailed on a misdemeanor charge, died while locked up there. He was essentially eaten alive by insects and bed bugs while in custody in America. And I'll say this happened in this United States of America. Talk about that. And as I said, I was fascinated. I love your writing anyway, but I was so fascinated by your article because you could have just focused on the politics of this, but you really did hone in on the conditions of the jail. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about that and this larger issue of our prison systems. Just about the article itself. Just talk about it.
Absolutely. So I was inspired to write, quite frankly, because I was tiring of the news coverage of Trump and the co-conspirators and how they were going to all have to be booked at Rice Street or the Fulton County Jail. One, because I've been working in bail reform and pretrial for quite some time. And the issues of the Fulton County Jail are not new, nor are they isolated to Fulton County. In this year alone, 18 people have died in that jail. And in large part, it's due to overcrowding, lack of adequate staffing, them not receiving the attention that they deserved in terms of medical care. But this is a jail that is known to be overcrowded. This is a jail that is known to not supply basic things to individuals who are there, like water, like food. They are not making the rounds that they need to make in this jail. And it is infested. We have a rap industry in this country that has made light of Rice Street. Like it is literally mentioned in several songs. And to the point that the opening of the article made, sadly, Mr. Thompson, who died there just a few months ago, his family had an independent autopsy. Fulton County commissioners, after that autopsy, voted to unanimously award that man's family $4 million. You don't do that when you know that you are not liable for something.
And I wanted to read, and Ameshia, I wanted to read from your actual article. So an independent autopsy report found that the cause of Thompson's death was complications due to severe neglect, among other factors that included untreated schizophrenia, dehydration, malnutrition, and severe body insect infestation after being exposed to bed bugs, lice, and other pests for months. Like infestation. Like we're accustomed to, mental health issues but a severe body insect infestation, that is disgusting. That is inhumane.
It got to the point, because pictures were released, it got to the point where these bed bugs and other insects in that jail cell covered his body, literally ate through his flesh, and he was still laying there. For 3 months, after complaint after complaint after complaint, they were eating this man alive.
Wow. That is as you said, this isn't something that's limited to Fulton County. And that's why, people want to use this as a mocking way. Donald Trump going to Rice Street, but it's actually an opportunity, much as you did here. It's an opportunity to talk about the conditions of the jails in our country. You remember, you have connections to Mississippi just as well as I do. And we remember some years back, it was an effort that Jay-Z ended up getting involved in, because we saw the video footage of Parchman prison in penitentiary in Mississippi. And it was a similar thing, but then there were deaths, and we saw the videos of it. And so Jay-Z and some group ended up getting involved in it. But we're seeing, whether it's at, a place like Georgia or even at a Rikers Island, it really doesn't matter if it's a red or a blue thing. And that's why I wanted to talk about this in an apolitical way, because it's not as if red, like blue cities or blue areas do better than red areas. And when I say Republican versus, Democrat versus Republican, it's not as if they do any better. This is a national issue. And too often, because we talk about these things in such a political way, it then allows us to ignore where we find many common ground. We saw that with the fight over the police reform, the various versions of police reform bill. Politics always gets in the way, but at the end of the day, the lives of people have been impacted by. Do you think it is because we see the incarcerated individuals as disposable that we just don't care? We kind of lock them up. We already know there's a history of not providing any type of services to actually allow them to, re-enter back into society. There are a number of things, criticisms of the prison industry itself. But do you think it's because we just view them as disposable that no one seems to care across the board, like across the political spectrum?
Absolutely. And you couldn't have put it better. And it's sad, because 1 in 2 families will have someone incarcerated in this country. That means that nearly everyone in this country will have someone in their immediate family incarcerated at some point in their life, be it whether that is jail or prison. Jail has a lot more of a walkthrough of incarceration, quite frankly, because a lot of people cannot afford bail. They cannot afford to get out, specifically Black, brown, low-income, indigent populations, and a growing segment of America that has mental health crises and mental health conditions. But when you talk to people, and I've done this in focus groups and in surveys, when you talk to people about the changes that need to happen in jails, the reforms that need to happen in prisons, they don't get the same amount of empathy. They don't get the same amount of care. It doesn't matter whether you are a red state or a blue state. It is seen as you need to be there. You have somehow done something that, would put you away, and that no longer should we care about your condition. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge problem, especially in the jail system, because these are individuals who have not stood their day in court. They are innocent until proven guilty. They are individuals who have not had a chance to sit before a jury. They're individuals who have not had a chance to have their stories heard, or the crimes that they've been accused of even investigated. Yet they're languishing in jail, sometimes up to 2 to 3 years, meanwhile having not been found guilty of anything.
Monte Stinson.
Jails are funded very differently than prisons, because jails are funded locally by the county. So depending on where you live, your jail could be entirely in squalor based on the finances of that county.
And I'm sitting and reading more because that's another issue, not just the conditions of the bill, but the whole bail reform system. Reading from your article, Monte Stinson languished in the Fulton County Jail for nearly a year after not being able to afford his $3,000 bail. He was found unresponsive and died in his cell earlier this month. Noni Batiste Kosoko was found dead in her cell this past July. Since January 22, as you said, 18 people have died in Fulton County custody. The issue of bail, because this actually moves us in the direction of bail reform, something else I wanted to talk to you about. Who was that? Oh, gee, the name, New York, Rikers Island, backpack. Oh, gee, he ended up committing suicide. Oh, gee. Khalif Browder. You remember him from Rikers Island in New York City. It was a young man. He was accused of, I believe, maybe stealing a backpack or something, but he ended up being in Rikers Island. Then he was maybe 17, 18 years old, but just to have someone in a super maximum security, facility like that, all of the problems that he had, he ultimately ended up committing suicide. But just the idea that he too was not able to, and I can't remember what his bail was, but you have people who are not able to afford bail. And what happens in our political discussions, even now, you see with people like Ron DeSantis and others who are attacking the reforms that came out of the First Step Act. But this bail reform, the bail reform isn't supposed to be about allowing just criminals to go back on the street. And obviously, no system is perfect. And I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, if something bad happens because of an initiative or implementation of our government, we say, well, that's the reason that the entire system itself is bad. On the issue of bail reform, there is a need for bail reform in cases like Monte Stinson. As you pointed out, it speaks to why that's important.
Absolutely. And just to level set, Khalif Browder's bail at Rikers Island was set at $3,000. In most cases, with an indigent population, you also look towards bail bondsmen. In bail bondsmen, you pay a certain portion of your bail to that bondsman with the promise that the rest will be paid over time. The overwhelming majority of individuals who are locked up in jails today who cannot afford bail have bail set at less than $800. Those individuals have an annual income of less than $15,000. So you're talking about some of the poorest of the poor people in this country, and they are literally sitting and languishing in jail on money they will never have, nor can they call up a friend, a family member, or anything like that to provide it for them. This has nothing to do with criminality. This has nothing to do with any charge. They are literally there as nonviolent criminals, because we also have to remember that the overwhelming majority of people sitting in jail today are there on nonviolent charges. They are there. Taxpayers are racking up the cost of this. Meanwhile, they are languishing and have not been found guilty of anything solely because they cannot afford bail.
And that's a class issue. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And to your point, it happens in red states, blue states, purple states. Thankfully, over the past month, my home state of Illinois got rid of cash bail. They were the first state in the entire nation to do so.
And explain that. Explain we have about 2 minutes. Explain the cash bail. Explain that.
So in its inception, cash bail was supposed to be leveraged to ensure that someone would not be a flight risk. Someone who is accused of a crime would not leave the area. Mm-hmm. In addition to protecting communities, it was supposed to be a part of public safety. What we found over time is that the overwhelming majority of people who receive cash bail assessments are Black and brown people, largely people who don't make enough to even get a plane ticket to go someplace else. In addition to individuals who are low risk meaning they do not have priors, and they also don't have they don't have a charge that is violent of any kind. Mm-hmm. So what we've seen is that jails were able to make more money locally by holding people than they were actually able to then letting them go. So we've seen more and more states decide that maybe electronic monitoring would be a cheaper route, again, because this costs taxpayers thousands of dollars a day per person to house someone in a jail. But in addition to that, these jails are overcrowded. Mm-hmm. And I feel as though what we're seeing happen now with bail specifically is a push towards a more tough on crime mantra. We saw what happened after the pandemic, where, you know, some levels of crime went up with carjackings and other things. And this push to incarcerate more people grew. Mm-hmm. It's not helpful for our communities. It's definitely not helpful for the outgrowth of poverty and mental health. 1 in 2 individuals who are locked up in jails have a verified mental illness, be it whether it's schizophrenia or the like. Mental conditions are very serious, and jails don't have the facility in terms of medicine, doctors, and evaluations that prisons do. So they're not even getting that level of care while they are there. It is a very dangerous place to be.
Wow.
And the bail reform system is not moving as swiftly as it should. And quite frankly, more states should be doing more to ensure that we are taking care of these individuals and not throwing them away and forgetting about them and essentially preying on the poor, because that's what the bail system currently does.
Thank you.
It's an attack on the poor.
Ameshia, this was an excellent conversation, a very timely conversation. Ameshia Cross is a writer, Democratic strategist, media contributor, former policy advisor for the National Urban League, and campaign communications advisor for President Barack Obama. You are listening to Fault Lines with Melik Abdul. Stick with us. We're coming back on the other side of the break.